Black and white is all about simplifying the image by removing information, and the information we're removing is the colour. We do this to enhance its appeal and create impact. The most logical way to achieve this, in my view, is to start with the original raw image. Make the decision to create the monochrome from the start, rather than as an afterthought. A conversion of an already created colour image can work great, but on balance probably better directly edited through Adobe Camera Raw. This way we have the best opportunity to create the contrast and impact that a black and white needs. What sort of image do we choose to make into a black and white? Well, that's the $64,000 question. But if you open up an image into Adobe Camera Raw as I have here, and we hit the black and white button, we will get an idea of how the image is going to work, or not, as the case may be, and as we can see here, probably not. I've decided to use this image for my demonstration because it has pretty good contrast. So although this image looks a little dull at first glance, we can see contrast, but if we lift the exposure and the shadows, we can see the potential. So if I just do that, remember we can use mask to bring down the sky, and even perhaps a bit of clarity. We can see we've got some potential here. We've got a beautiful lead in. Not sure what that is on the right hand side. It looks like a small tree which is being blown around in the wind, because I think this was quite a long exposure, 1.6 seconds, so we can remove that later. So I'm going to reset this back to colour. Let's give it a go. Now I've just done a little cropping to tidy up the composition and a little straightening of that horizon. But now I'm going to click the black and white button. But what I'm also going to do is to say to Adobe Camera Raw, give it your best shot automatically. And look at that. I'm going to start from that position. You can see by the sliders here that it's given us a good starting point. It's added contrast by moving the whites to the right, blacks to the left. It's lifted the shadows, which the image clearly required, and some of the highlights needed to be reduced. As a result, we can see from the histogram here that the shadows are a little bit blocked in places, but we can also see by looking at the image that's minimal. And to relieve that, we would have to lose a little bit of contrast. We can choose to do that, but you can see it's not very much, but I wouldn't say that was vital or important at all. But I think I'm going to go straight to my clarity and give it quite a healthy amount. And now the sparkle of my black and white is beginning to show itself. Sometimes I take a look at a little bit of dehaze as well, just to see what sort of effect it has. Double click and it'll reset. I'm not sure it's adding a great deal that's positive, so I'll leave that aside for a moment. But we do have quite a lot of lovely detail in the foreground, so maybe I could bring up the texture a little bit, and we can see a nice amount of texture come through. Let me double click that again. Let's bring it up a bit more. Yes, I'm going to accept that. So looking at my image, I can see I need to remove that tree. I can see I've got a slight weakness on the left of the sky, maybe on the left of the image, but for now I'm going to take just a few moments and look at the image and consider what I need to do next. Now what I'm going to do next is to select my sky. I'm going to select the entire sky and then probably put a gradient on the top. I'm going to take down the highlights, a little bit of exposure, not too much, because I think what's going to make most of the impact is the blacks and the whites to give it that impact in the sky. And maybe if I scroll down, even a little more clarity up there, a little bit of sparkle just appeared, and that's not looking too bad. I think what I'd like to do next is to add a linear gradient at the top, just to darken it a little more so it balances with the base. Let's do that from the white cross. Click and drag just from about there, just down to about that sort of spot, I would guess, and drop down the exposure, maybe a little blacks and whites. Now, what I'd like to do here is to, let me move that image away from that panel for a minute. What I'd like to do here is to darken it down quite a lot, but I don't like the way it darkens that too much. So I'm going to go to my subtract, select my brush, look at the flows down quite low. Just want to bring a little bit of that back. I don't want it quite so dense because it just doesn't look right. Control 0 will fit the image back on screen. Got a bit of a weakness over on the left hand side. Not sure I need too much around here, but maybe a little. So this time I'm going to use the shortcut key of the G key. Click and drag because G will bring up the linear gradient. I can perhaps lift the shadows a little bit here because I want to drop down the exposure. So I'm lifting them and dropping them down, but the effect is I get the corner at the top reduced just a little bit, and I think I can see a little mark or two up there. So maybe I should look at that next, and maybe I should have looked at that sooner. So let's move over to the option here, healing. I'm going to select my healing brush, visualize spots. Ooh, I'm forgetting that this is an image from a few years ago. Look at all those dust spots, but there's no problem here. I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes just giving them all a touch and removing them all. Now as we come back to the main tab, I have to say I never get frustrated over dust spots. They are just an occupational hazard. And I suppose it's because in the darkroom days, dealing with one spot on a piece of paper could take you 10 or even 20 minutes. So being able to touch the dust spots here and remove them, not a big deal. Now, what I want to do here is just some local work. I'm going to lighten the tones around here with a brush mask, so I lead my viewer into the picture. I may do a little bit on these lines here. Then I'll apply a radial gradient just to darken in the corners, the tops, the sides and the edges. We've seen that done before. So I'm going to go ahead and do that to shorten the length of this video. So as I turn on this little eye here, you can see just the little bit of lightening I've done and the difference it makes. Nice sparkle in the foreground. And this one is the radial gradient, just to darken the edges. Last thing to do is noise suppression, and then I'm going to open this up into Photoshop. Now I didn't show the noise suppression because all I applied was the default setting of 50. Now when we look back at the original image, it never had heaps of colour to start with, so the loss of that colour is a positive, I think. Now the image I've just opened up into Adobe Camera Raw is probably not best suited for a black and white conversion because it needs that colour, doesn't it? But there are some sliders that I never required in my seascape that I feel are worth pointing out. Now as you can see, all of the tabs I've closed up. Take a look at Colour Mixer. Because if I were to go to the black and white tools here and click, the colour mixer changes to a black and white mixer. And when we open it up, we've got a series of sliders which will affect various colours within the image. We have an auto setting and we even have a targeted adjustment. But if we just pick the reds, for example, and I move the slider left and right, you can see it's having an impact on those. Oranges are going to be fairly positive because the balloon on the left was bright orange, so I can darken that balloon or I can lighten it. You'll find that some of these sliders don't always have an effect. Let's take the aquas, a little bit of an effect on the middle balloon but not much. And of course, whatever we do with these sliders, if you just double click them, they'll all reset back to their default values. So they're worth considering when you're doing your monochrome conversions in Adobe Camera Raw. So when we process our images into black and white or monochrome, some of them are going to work great, others not so much. We win some and we lose some, but the more we do this sort of thing, then our wins will outpace our losses. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.